Hey everybody, Pete A. Turner, executive producer and host of your Break It Down show, Boop-a-doo, the international leader, veteran-produced podcasts. All right, maybe I made that part up, but it's also sort of true. So anyhow, hey, got Jeremy McKane back on, second time as a guest, probably his fourth or fifth episode overall. I guess this is his fourth. He brought us other folks who study and look at the ocean. One of them was Fabien Cousteau. And then the other was Terrance Long, who we had on the live version the other day. His podcast version is not out yet. And Terrance is talking about how we literally dump munitions, bombs, chemical weapons into the ocean. This is as a planet, as an international body. We've made it sort of illegal, but we ignore decades worth of dumping from before and still do it. And then they're like, oh, we can't do it in the ocean? Well, let's just do it in these rivers and these lakes and these specific sites where we literally throw our bombs and munitions into the ocean. So Jeremy has his finger on the pulse of what happens. He's been to Necker Island several times, Richard Branson, as they try to figure out how do we incent the behavior that we want, while simultaneously allowing people, we quite often talk about the exploding middle class in China. Same problem in India, places where, their poverty level is higher than ours, and they're trying to emerge out of this. They want cars, they want air conditioning, they want electricity, and all these things are typically powered by petrochemicals. Oh my God. We had Bjorn Lomborg come on the other day, and he said, hey, the best way to deal with climate change is to get people out of this extreme poverty, give them options so that they don't have to burn poop inside their house and breathe that stuff and be, trapped by their poverty in these places. So all of these problems mix into something where we're like, how in the heck do we deal with this? And so that's what we try to figure out in this episode. How do you balance the needs of people to live the way they want to live and give them the same freedom that a lot of us have, while simultaneously saying, hey, let's ease up on how fast we're tearing apart the world and the ocean. Of course, I'm a walking contradiction. I'm absolutely in support of petrochemical companies. I think energy companies are part of the way forward in a lot of ways because of their ability to invest in energy in general. I think that they are. But then again, I'm like desperate to help the ocean and figure these things out. I lean right. I lean left. I am absolutely a walking contradiction. But I think what you'll get out of this show is you'll hear us struggle with these big multi-system problems because the ocean is part of many systems. There's, little biospheres. There's, the entire ocean. And Jeremy said this, probably got it from somewhere else, but it's like a big bathtub. And when you throw something away, it doesn't go away. It's still there. And so how do we deal with the consumption and the preservation and the lack of abundance? All of these problems give us this ocean problem. So I think it's just an interesting topic to explore. We'll continue to explore, hopefully get a lot more people on talking about it, because that's what we do here on the show. We try to find these problems, illustrate them, and hopefully get us all a little bit smarter so that when we hear a problem, we don't just react, we think, and we go, well, there's answers for these questions. There's actual experts out there. All right, enough of me talking about that. Thank you all so much. Really, from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate all of the support, all of the comments on the live side, on the podcast side. Just keep coming. If you think I missed you, hit me up, pete@breakitdownshow.com. I absolutely will respond. I get overwhelmed sometimes. I get behind. Don't feel bad about reminding me. I will respond. But just, come at me, and I'd love to hear from you. And if you have an idea on a show, please hit me up. International, fine. We love international guests. All right, I'm talking too long. Let me get this done by saying Save the Brave, savethebrave.org. Donate tab, put a small amount of money in each month, or do one big donation. It can be stocks. It can be your old boat that you don't want anymore, whatever it is. We'll figure out a way to turn it into something that can help us fight PTSD. And the final words I'm going to say to you, Jeremy McKane. Oh, yeah.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hi, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Jeremy McKane, and you're watching The Break It Down Show.
I'm recording this from Phil's house. Everybody knows Phil Green. He's around here somewhere doing something, but I'm here in the studio already recording and been on the road. Gosh, Jeremy, we drove across the nation. I came through Dallas and everything, and still not back home yet because I got a quarantine because of my exposure to the entire South. I mean, California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and then back through all of that stuff, interacting with people and everything else. So I've got to take those solid 2 weeks and make sure that I'm healthy. But it's great to still be able, despite being quarantined, to be able to put together a show with you, because I love our conversations. They're so interesting, and I find what you do fascinating, and I'm just desperate to help you in any way possible.
Oh, likewise, man. I think what you're doing is really great, and it's always. I was just listening to a recent show that you did with Sandra, our mutual friend Sandra Ponce de Leon, and it's always really great content, and I love the things that you get into. So it's a real honor to be here. So thank you.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, just so everybody knows who you are. By the way, you've got your own episode. We've also done one with Fabien Cousteau also, but give everybody the quick blurb on what you do and why it's so important.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess if I was to quickly define who I am, I always tell everybody I'm an artist. That's a bit ambiguous, obviously, but I'm an artist that focuses on ocean issues. I put an emphasis on what the threats are, but on what we should still continue to fight for and how we can do that. And so I'm also the CEO and founder of the Ocean Currency Network, which is OCN.ai. As well as a convening on Necker Island called Ultramarine. I'm a co-founder along with my dear friend and partner Susie Mai. And what we do is we bring 70 to 100 people from around the world, 15 different countries, 5 different disciplines, and we say, hey, we have this one issue we want to focus on. Who's going to stand up and say I'm going to do it? So we all hold each other's feet to the fire. It's less of a gathering. It's more of a family.
I love it. Yeah. These are the kind of things, like you, I'm an artist. I use the spoken word and conversations to get there. You're more of a photography-based person, although you do your own chats that are also equally wonderful. Anytime I see that you're on live, I always try to at least pop in to acknowledge, if not get fascinated by what you're doing. So art does drive these things,
It does, and I think it's so interesting. So if you go to Hawaii, there's a term that they use there that I find just fascinating. And on the mainland, as if you want to do business in New York, it's really quickly like, what do you want? And, why are you bothering me? In Hawaii, it's really kind of laid back, and we say, well, let's talk story for a minute, is what they say, and then we'll talk business. And talk story is like just whatever. There's no agenda. And I think when all of this kind of hit and everybody was stuck at their house. I think everybody kind of got a bit depressed and kind of focusing on the virus issues. And I thought, well, what if we talk story about some of these other, I thought, well, let's just bring some people on, and I just thought it was a great way to carry a conversation. Who knows where it will end up going. But I always find that, like, when we talk about something that we're all passionate about, you leave that conversation with something, say, what if I tried this, or what if I could do this? And those moments are, I think, where innovation is kind of at its most earliest foundation.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I bring to the table quite often, because of my experience in combat zones, is perspective. And I often just spin the camera around and I say, what's it like from this? Like, if you're going to go help someone in a place that sucks and they need help desperately, what's it like to be them? Let's not assign them help that they need. Let's find out what they find important. And we just had another friend of Sandra's that she introduced me to, a guy named Brian Dolan, and he runs.
Yeah, that's the one I was listening to.
It's so good,
that was a great episode.
I love it. Yeah, it accepts that these are hard problems to solve too. By the way, to get everybody on board. I mean, the ocean is fairly simple. Get the entire world to agree to go in one direction, and we'll get a lot better fast. Problem is,
sure. Sure. Well, it's so funny because I think for mainlanders, like, we see the ocean as a dividing line, right? It's us versus them. It's like, I grew up in Texas, and, you go to the ocean and it's just this vastness, right? And you're like, what's on the other side of that? And that is the barrier. But ancient Polynesians saw that as the highway to connect other places. And so I think that change of mindset, when you think about it, is pretty powerful when we start talking about what does, rapid prototyping look like? What does collaboration look like? Well, sounds cliche, but the world is your oyster, if I could use an ocean pun.
Yeah. The world is your oyster. I mean, it truly is. And if we choose to not treat our oysters so terribly, it'll kick out pearls for us all the time.
I think so. I think it might.
So give us some good news, bad news. What's the bad news right now about the ocean?
Well, I mean, that's a 7-hour telethon. I think there's a couple things that I'm interested in at the moment, and one of them is this obviously illegal fishing is just, that's not a new thing. I mean, everybody knows about illegal fishing and overfishing and what I think most would call the tragedy of the commons. And what that is let's say that, Pete, you and I live on the same, land and we both share a pond, and we go there every morning and we go fishing, and we're going to go get some food for our family. I wave at you at the other cross of the pond and I say, how you doing? Great. Yeah, catch any fish? Yeah, I caught a couple fish. And you go away with 2, I go away with 2, and we feed our family. But pretty soon, you and we start to have more and more conversations because we're out there a much longer period of time, and we catch 1 fish each, maybe. Instead of 2 hours of fishing, we're 8 hours of fishing. And then that gets worse and worse. And then one day, you don't catch anything, but I catch 1 fish. And so you come out there early in the morning before me, and you catch 2 fish. And I come out there, and I catch no fish. We're not counting fish. We don't really understand what's in the waters, but we know that when we catch something that's good, and that's a marketable thing. What I'm describing is that what's called is the tragedy of the commons. And so what we're seeing is, we've got a massive population. China's got a massive population that they need to feed. And, business as usual has been, let's go to the ocean, get some fish. Problem is that they're having to go further and further and further and further because we're pulling out more fish than the fish have a chance to regenerate. And so if you open up a little website called globalfishingwatch.org, it's free. You can actually click on the map, go to the area where Ecuador and the Galapagos Islands are. And what you're going to see is a bunch of white dots. A lot of white dots. So many white dots, it's actually bigger than the archipelago of the Galapagos as a whole. What's interesting about that is those are all fishing boats. Now, they're not all Chinese boats. A good majority of them, I think the Ecuadorian Navy estimates there's about 260 boats that are Chinese. Now, these are fishing boats. They're also refrigeration boats because, well, guess what? China is a very far away place from Ecuador. So it needs to be refrigerated all the way back for it to be usable. But we're pulling fish out at just unprecedented rates. Now, this is happening in what's called the outside of the EEZ, which is the Economic Exclusion Zone. So you have 200 miles of national jurisdiction, and then what's outside of that is, well, really, it's no man's land. It's it basically falls under the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Seas. And, there are treaties and stuff in place, but that's where a lot of these fishing operations happen, and it's not really poaching. It's not illegal because there is no law. The question is, should we? And it's something that I'm really interested in. But Ecuador provides kind of a unique situation because they control the Galapagos. And so 200 miles from the Galapagos, they have control of those waters. 200 miles off the shore of Ecuador, they have control of those waters. But there's a gap in between those two areas. So that now you're seeing all this just cluster of fishermen coming in there and just grabbing stuff. And, to be fair, there are Ecuadorian boats that are in those waters too. I just, it's something that I don't necessarily have an answer to. I think as consumers, we need to realize that our fish that we eat doesn't come from the grocery store, and the grocery store gets it from somewhere. You have to think about that. You have to think about what that cost is. So that's one thing that I think is super important that we should think about. The other thing is I've recently been enlightened, I guess you could say, about the effects of unexploded ordinances in our oceans. So that's another long topic. I mean, oftentimes like right now there's 2 unexploded ordinances in Molokini. Molokini is just it's basically like a little crater just off Maui, if anybody knows Maui. And they found 2 World War munitions on that island. So one of them is a sand bomb that didn't explode. I believe that both of these bombs are fused. And there's another one that is a pressure-sensitive bomb that basically after a certain depth, thing, boom, blows up. Well, they didn't, and they've been sitting there, and there's coral reef that's actually growing on top of it. So the question was, well, should we come blow this thing up? Well, if you blow it up, you're going to just destroy the coral reef. That's not good. And so everyone was all up in arms on that. Surprisingly, what most people don't realize is the health impact of these munitions that are disposed in the ocean. TNT is incredibly toxic for the human body, not from the standpoint of exploding.
Right.
That's very toxic, but also the actual chemicals inside TNT. And I've learned from this guy, his name's Terrance Long, and he runs underwatermunitions.org, which is an NGO.
You had him on your chat the other day.
I did. And look, I'm not an expert on this topic. I just like to ask a lot of dumb questions, and I find that in that process I learn a lot. But yeah, we chatted a lot. So the question is like, okay, well, how many munitions are there? Well, there's actually estimated 1 billion tons of dumped munitions in our oceans at any given spot, right? All together. Terrance and his team has pulled out, hundreds, if not thousands, of dangerous munitions out of the Baltic Sea and beyond. So the question is like, why does this stuff exist? And so those are two things that I've been looking at recently. And then I say maybe the third ongoing and extremely important topic is and we've talked about this before, is the topic of deep sea mining, which is where we build these really cool devices called, lithium batteries, and we've got these rare earth minerals that we need to build technology and solar panels. But we're running out of places. They call it rare earth minerals for a reason.
Yeah.
But it just turns out that at the very deep part of the ocean, they have these minerals where you can just pick them up like little chocolate bonbons, and it's very appealing to a lot of nations. And so, but what is the trade-off? We don't know. So those are three main areas that I think deserve our attention.
Where are we getting it right? Where are things improving?
That's a great question. And I love the way you asked that too, because I think that's also important. I think now is interesting because now more than any time in history, we have this awareness that we're capable of understanding. With the illegal fishing thing, I think there will be a time in the future that will cease to exist in the format that it does now, because there are groups like Hawkeye 360, Horizon Technologies, and there's a whole slew of other ones. And what they do is they do RF geolocation from space. So even if you shut off your transponder at sea, it doesn't matter. We're going to find you. Right. And the way that it works is they send 3 satellites in low Earth orbit in formation. So if you can think of like a little, like a blue, like 3 blue angels basically flying in low Earth orbit. What they do is they sense whenever they pick up a signal, and then they triangulate that so they can tell you exactly where that signal is. And so they can pick up like a 1 watt VHF. So that means if you shut down everything on your boat and you're just floating around, and then you pick up the VHF to one of the other guys on the other side of the boat, gotcha.
Yeah.
So in order to, I guess they're going to have to just get the tin cans and the rope like we used to have as kids. Yeah. That's going to be the only way that they're going to hide from us. Yeah. But there's a slew of other things that generate EMF that can be detected from space, and so I think that's a really innovative approach. The other things that I think that we're doing is I think that we're becoming more aware of the effect of creating more protected spaces in the ocean and realizing the value in protecting these areas. This year, the collective body that represents Antarctica and the research that happens on Antarctica are voting in October. Something called Antarctica 2020. The idea is to protect essentially what amounts to 7 million square kilometers of ocean, which is more or less essentially 1% of the total ocean, into forming a new marine protected area. All of the countries except 2 have said yes, that they want to protect it, and those 2 holdouts are Russia and China. And hopefully Russia steps in and says, we're going to do it, because this is also the 200th anniversary of the exploration and discovery of Antarctica from Russia. So maybe this will be a really good opportunity for them to kind of say, hey, in honor of our 200th anniversary, we're going to protect something that we love and cherish so much. So I think those are some really good starts. There's others, but I like those 2 things.
We had recently, and it's funny how like all of these guests all kind of cross and touch paths, even if they don't know about each other. We had Bjorn Lomborg on the other day, and he used to be a darling of environmentalists, and he is an environmentalist. He just looks at the economic aspects of it as a political scientist. Anyhow, he's like, where do we put our money to work? What are the big problems we have to solve? And yes, environmental issues are one, but if we could drastically reduce poor people, the impacts of these things. So he's like trying to balance out, like, where does our money need to go? And I think you'll appreciate this. He's like, if we're not focused on carbon taxes, we're not doing the right things. And he's like, this is a good way to approach this problem, is to incent this behavior or incentivize that behavior. And it's funny that someone who can go from like, wow, we really love what this guy's saying, to like, he's on every top 50 influencer list. And then it's like, never mind that guy, because I don't know, he downplays the overall impact and talks about where the work needs to happen. I guess folks just don't like that sort of thing. But you and I both know, like, these, the way we can move value now and assign a value to carbon usage, it's incredible. Yeah. And if it isn't here today, which it really is, like what you're doing and what other companies are doing with assigning value to the use of carbon, I think it's really going to change how we see value in business.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's interesting. A couple years ago, I had an opportunity to meet, I'm just drawing a blank on his name. I only met him briefly, clearly. But, he's an astronaut, lived on the International Space Station for some time. What's interesting about what he said to me was like, look, we figured this out on the space station. Like, we recycle our urine. If we could do that up there, we should be able to do it down here. And, you have to be extremely efficient. If you're burning, if somebody's in the back of the space station smoking or lighting up a campfire, things aren't going to be so good so quickly for the people who are inhabiting that space station. Right. And I think we need to think about the planet the exact same way. I mean, essentially that's what we are. We're just spaceship Earth floating through space. And so I think what's interesting though is that with all of this, we for so long, for so many centuries, we were all separated by continents and countries, and we only talked to ourselves, our own people. But I think now with social media, we're kind of entering this adolescent period of civilization where we understand that we have power. We don't really quite know how to use it. We have the ability to communicate anyone on the planet at any given moment. We don't really understand what the consequences or pros could possibly be to that yet. I think we're learning. And I think what at some point, I hope, we realize and say, oh, you know what? We kind of all want the same things. Right. We should probably figure out how to work together. You mentioned poverty, and I think Dr. Jane Goodall put it the best. She says, we can't get people to think about conservation if we don't solve the issue of poverty. Yeah. And let's be fair. Like, I love the ocean. I want to help fight and protect it. But if I found out that my kids were starving or they're hungry or they didn't have a place to live, I'm not going to be a conservationist. And I think that's pretty much the case with everybody. And I also think it's unfair for, Americans like ourselves who essentially, whether you're the poorest person in America, you're still the 1% of the entire planet. Which is fair, may not be the most comfortable thing, but we are still the 1%. I think it's unfair to go to a third world country and say, hey, you should protect your waters and you should stop fishing and you should do all these things and then walk away. And it's like, what? You're going to go home to your nice highways and your telephone and your internet and you're telling us how to live? It's not fair, So I'm a big believer in when you say, hey, we need to protect this area, we need to stop fishing, you're removing an economic driver. You need to find a way to reintroduce a new economic driver to continue allowing people to survive, because without that, there's nothing that's going to happen.
When Bjorn and I were talking, I brought up, it's so crazy when you look at this, but I brought up a picture of Hispaniola, which, for those who don't know, that's Haiti and Dominican Republic. And the Dominican Republic is in no way a wealthy nation. But if you look at the satellite image of this island, the Haiti side is a desert. This is in the tropics. And then on the other side, it's green. It's lush. It looks like a normal island. But that's sort of like what you're talking about. You can't have conservation if you don't have enough things, because you're stuck on consumption. We need resources. I'm sure that you could talk to every Haitian and be like, yeah, we would love to have energy in another way to cook our food or whatever it is, but we don't. So we go out and we cut down trees, or the lost civilizations, like they didn't have enough. And so something happened, then they wiped them out, or they left, or whatever it is. And so you're right. The conservation requires abundance. And if we can't better create or balance abundance, then you can't conserve reliably,
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
The other thing I wanted to ask about it, so I'll say the China problem, and I'm being completely unfair to China, because it's also the India problem, and it's also that entire portion of I guess you would call it the Far East, the Far Orient.
Yeah.
They are exploding in terms of the middle class, and there are less and less folks living in huts, and they want things. They want, they want a Walmart. As much as we love Walmart and go buy cheap goods and everything else, they want these things too. They want electricity.
Of course.
Of course. As a guy that's been abroad, if you have electricity, which we all have here, again, all of us are in the 1%, it's such a stabilizing factor. And you want food, and you want not just food, I want tuna and whatever it is, right? Flounder. I want to eat flounder when I want to eat flounder. I've got a good job. I make 6 figures, or whatever China's version of that is. Their middle class is bigger than our entire population.
Of course, yes.
It's shocking. So they have to provision those folks, and where do they find the food? You can only do so much with what they have. They have to go to the ocean. They have to go to other countries and try to figure out how to feed these folks.
Right. I mean, but we're also talking about doing things the way that we've done them, and with a different population value. And now that has shifted, our way of doing business hasn't shifted. And therein lies the problem. Like the old adage is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's broke.
It's broke.
It needs to be fixed. The question is, will we? Are we open to that change? And I hope that we are, because if we're not, at some point, we call it natural selection, if you will, that will take hold pretty quickly, and we'll realize, in a relatively short amount of time that we no longer can survive in this way. We're going to have to kind of reinvent ourselves in many ways. My daughter. I'm at my parents' house. We kind of came down here to visit with them.
I'm trying to get the TV turned down while I'm talking. Hi, honey.
No worries. Say hello, Zara.
Hi, how are you? They were saving the world over here.
Yeah. It's great. We've actually been thinking about all of this. It's like, we've not gone anywhere, and neither is my family. So we kind of developed what we kind of call Ohana Bubbles, which are these, and if anybody who loves Lilo and Stitch, Ohana means family. The idea was, it's like, we need to be really careful. And this whole conversation about schools opening up, I was telling my wife, I was like, you know what, if this has to happen, and we're going to be virtual again, I kind of want to start to at least plan with a place to go, and I can kind of, be a little bit more hands-on with my kids, and then also maybe even expose them to some, hopefully not a virus, but more culture and those kinds of things. So, we're this is all new territory for us, but this is what's been great about this for me, is I've been able to have my kids, with me this whole time, and it's a blast. So that you might get to see the younger ones. You might pop in a little bit.
All right. That's hot. That's fine.
Yeah.
The opportunity to reinvent how you create something, like, for example, in our house, we have a very small, simple house, but there's 2 people going to college. There's 2 people running businesses. One of them is me, of course. And then also there's all 4 of us living in the house. Like, it quickly becomes like too much. And so I'm setting up a tent in the backyard. I'll have a tent in a couple of days here. And I'll have a backyard studio, and it'll just be a different place to go and, get out of everybody's hair, but still be able to be in our bubble. And
in Texas, you don't want to have a tent out in the backyard.
I live in Orange County, so we can do that here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. I'm envious. Yeah, we just think about outside and we just sweat.
Oh, yeah. I'm not saying it's not going to take some getting used to, but I've also lived a lot of my life in tents and whatnot.
Yeah.
When you bring folks to Necker Island, that sounds super exotic and sexy, like the whole place got waylaid and Richard Branson snaps his fingers and it's all back, and I know it's not that simple, but that's how it seems. How do people that disconnected from suffering? Because that's just a fact, right? I mean, yes, you can go visit suffering, but you can't know it because
it's true.
It's true. How do they identify successful things. Like I look at it from my point of view as a guy that's gone out and lived in and amongst that stuff. I can always come back and just bring that ground truth, you know. And I use that example all the time of there was a district they were talking about, and they're like, "Hey, Pete, what's their favorite TV show out there?" You know, it's a really hard question, kind of a gotcha question. And I was able to look at the guy and say, "Dennis, there's no electricity in that valley," and it completely flips what the problem set was. And it was like, wow, what are we doing here? You know, so how do folks, you know, in places like Necker Island or any of these places where they're trying to solve these big complicated problems, how do they keep track of the reality on the ground?
I mean, it's a great question. I mean, I look at it like, you know, if I saw a man walking in the street with no shoes and his feet are bleeding, I don't need to have my feet bleed to know that he might appreciate some shoes. And I think, you know, there's no way. I mean, I was raised in Texas. I'm an American. I don't know what it's like to live in poverty, to go to sleep hungry, and to wonder if I have food for the next day. I don't know what that's like. I can't sympathize with that. Right. I do know that we all need these things. And if somebody is without, and I have the power to help, you know, give or do something or put something together to make something happen, then it should be done. Simple as that. I think this is where kind of the power of just collaboration really comes into play, right? It's every single one of us has some kind of superpower. You know, I don't know what your superpower is, but you do.
Eating back fat.
There you go. Yeah, so I'm sure there's a use for that somewhere, you know, and I always look at it as, you know, with Necker, I thought, you know, it didn't have to be Necker. First of all, right. It could be anywhere on the planet. I had always thought about doing something where I could say, well, what if I could bring this person that's really good at this person that's really good at this, and then you just kind of like, you know, the Arthur and the round table kind of scenario, right? Yeah. Everyone brings something to the figurative table. And then let's talk about something that's super hard. Let's see how quickly we solve it. And, you know, I watched how the Carbon War Room was created, the Elders was created, and, you know, I had zero connection to Sir Richard Branson or Virgin for that matter. And I just thought, hey, that's a great idea. You should bring people. And there used to be this little place that I would invite people to. It was my own version of Necker Island, and it was called Haggerston Island. And a guy by the name of Roy Turner owned it, and still owns it actually. We would go up there, and I would invite a few people. Say, hey, let's just come up here, you know. And it was just a way to connect people into nature. It was very primitive, but we'd often talk about really big things, you know. And what I think is interesting about your question is we are all disconnected. We don't really truly understand what it means to live in Yemen and not have any food, and to watch our children, you know, get so unbelievably skinny and die of starvation. We don't know what that's like. But I would argue that we all know that we're capable of doing something. So from the standpoint of Necker, I know that it has the ability to look like, you know, oh, this is a super exclusive place. There's these crazy rich people that are playing, and it's like, you know,
yeah.
Don't get me wrong. There's there. I wholeheartly believe in playing and having fun.
Sure.
But I also believe in hard work. And, you know, I'm a lot younger than Richard, and I probably would work all day, every day, just because I enjoy it. But Richard will stop and say, no, we're not going to work all day. We're going to work hard in the morning, and in the afternoon we're going to play. Yeah. And I've learned that there's some things there. But yeah, I would agree and say that, yeah, that nobody really truly understands that pain. Mm. But everyone that shows up to our event at Ultramarine on Necker Island, they all have the power to help make an impact. And I think that's really where the difference is. So, and like I said, the youngest one would pop in.
Yeah.
Hello, Sydney. Okay, all right. Can you? I'm just gonna have a chat real quick. Okay. Okay.
This is great. I love it. This is one of the best things about podcasts is, you know, we're in a pandemic. I'm in a quarantine, and your kids come in, and it doesn't matter. You know, it's because it's just this is life. Again, work, play. It's all balanced around us. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. It's the. And I don't mean to be critical of that, but I do know it is a problem.
No, I don't actually see it as a critical question at all. I think it's a very valid question.
And the thing is like the ivory tower, we need it. We need folks to think about theory and strategy and big scale provisions, but we also have to take that link ding, 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 all the way down to the ground, so that this is why we struggled in Iraq and Afghanistan, is that we would say we're going to support the government and make them legitimate. Well, here I am on the ground saying I can't find any legitimacy around here. Well, you're wrong. Like, well, I'm the guy asking the questions. Let me tell you something. And so you can't advance a strategic goal if you can't find ground truth validation of what you're doing. And it's deliberate work, but hard work is always going to be deliberate like that. Like, it just doesn't tolerate, a whimsical attitude or lofty pie. Like, yes, you can have pie in the sky, but you still have to get eggs and flour and apples and all that stuff to put the pie in the sky,
Yeah, and I mean, I think, we have people that come that they're artists, they're scientists, they're the people that have got boots on the ground that are doing stuff. And usually in these scenarios, you go to like a UN high level, meeting, and it's all the politicians that are so high up that they are disconnected in many ways. But I thought, well, we'll just put those 5 disciplines of people, put them all in the same room, and now you have a perspective shift that didn't exist before. And I think that's really what the beauty is of Ultramarine. And I don't really consider it a group or anything. I think everyone that attends, we all feel like we're some kind of family, really, because it's like we're there to help each other and help support each other. And if I felt passionate about something, so passionate, I promise you everybody would follow suit and say, all right, Jeremy, we'll help you. What can we do?
Hey, this is P.A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here. And if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
Each other. And if I felt passionate about something, so passionate, I promise you everybody would follow suit and say, all right, Jeremy, we'll help you. What can we do?
How do you guys sort out what you want to work on? I mean, like here in California, we've banned plastic straws, which is forever maddening to me because there's so much plastic in our lives in general. But I've also been to Djibouti. And if you want to go get plastic that's falling into the ocean, I'd say let's just send 100 people, 1,000 people there, because culturally, no one there who lives there, and this is not a knock on Ethiopia, Djibouti, that part of the world, but they look down on people that pick up trash. They do not, for the most part, in the,
many cultures.
Yeah, in the Arab Peninsula area, you're not going to find, waste management. And whether the waste management's good or not, it's irrelevant because the trash, here's a great example. So I'm in Egypt on an army post. We're doing an exercise, and it's international. And within like the same sitting period, 2 minutes, I watched a service member go to throw their trash into the garbage can. They walked out of their way off of the sidewalk, and then they went to put the trash in, and the wind puffed the piece of paper out of their hand, and it missed. I mean, it was over the garbage can, right? And so she went, oh, no. And then she ran over, and it must have been 10 yards that she went out of her way in excess off the sidewalk, grabbed the piece of paper up, and put it into the trash. As she was completing this process, 2 Egyptian dudes walked by. They have paper right over their shoulder, right? And so when we look at a problem like plastic, okay, you don't have to change their culture, but you can say, how about we get rid of all this trash for you? And I don't know what we do with it, but that's the kind of problem where you want to get plastic out of the ocean, go where it's not, for the most part, bagged up and accounted for like it is, for the most part, here in the United States.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think stuff that like what I guess was it Plastic Bank is doing is very innovative. They're doing something, and I have no connection to Plastic Bank whatsoever. Sure. I just think that what they're doing is pretty cool because it's now they're assigning value to this picking up trash, and it's like, and I think that kind of goes back to what I was saying before, is like you reintroduce some kind of economic driver. Well, that could be a way, A lot of the types of plastic that we do recover, there is value in it. PET is actually pretty valuable. There are other types of plastic which we don't know what to do with once it's happened. I mean, a good example of something that can't really be recycled and that we use a lot of are those disposable coffee cups. They're paper. We think, it's going to biodegrade. Wrong. Sorry. It's actually plastic lined paper cups, and there's zero use for them on the secondary market. So, I mean, I can't tell you how many. Before I knew that, I can't tell you how many of those things I actually. But now I have this. I have this little Yeti. I love Yeti, and I don't own Yeti, and Yeti doesn't sponsor me, but I love it. And I went to Necker, and they had these, and they gave them to me, and I was like, I use this every day. And there's another one called in Australia. I think they call them keep cups. And you can actually you can go to the coffee shops there and you can actually buy them, and then you get basically a discount for using this stuff. I think when we start looking at those kinds of things, you're like, okay, cool. That's how we solve the problem, but then now we've got a mess we got to clean up. Yeah. But nobody wants to go clean up a mess. I mean, when you were a kid, did you want to clean up your room?
I don't want to clean my room up now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the only way that we're going to do that is if we have an incentive, and I think Plastic Bank, seems to have a solution. And again, I don't know what their success rate is. I don't know a whole lot about the organization, but from a very conceptual idea, from a basic embryonic level, I think it's an interesting way to kind of test the waters, so to speak, to see if it would yield any big results. And I think in some places it actually has. When it's from a revenue standpoint.
The other thing is, we talked to Fabien Cousteau, and we talked about, the lack of exploration in the ocean, and it's as challenging, and probably in some ways more challenging to explore the ocean, just because it's just not an easy place to get to, but there's so much value, like the archaeological aspect, the mining aspect. Let's understand this space better. And, when we look at the desert, we go, there's nothing out there. That's just dead. And it turns out wonderful biodiversity in deserts. And so the same thing in these ocean deserts, where you're like, there's nothing down there. I bet when we got down there, we'd be like, oh my gosh, it's teeming with life. We just had to get there into that environment and see it.
Well, the hydrothermal vents in the ocean, which essentially where all life began, there was a period of time because it was so hot down there. They're like, nothing could possibly survive down here. Yeah. Well, just so turns out that's how ignorant we were when we were looking at this stuff. It turns out that vents are some of the most biodiverse areas on the planet, not just in the ocean, on the planet. Yeah. And these little organisms and little crabs and whatnot, they figured out how to just survive in these crazy hot temperatures. But it's super mineral rich. The question on deep sea mining, for those of you that don't know this whole kind of fiasco, I already mentioned the rare earth minerals. What they're actually going for is something called manganese nodules. Now, these manganese nodules, they take millions of years to be created, first of all, so they're very old. But inside there, typically when you get, lithium and copper and silver and all these other kinds of metals, you really got to move a lot of earth to be able to get this stuff. What's so nice, put that in air quotes, about this within a deep sea mining is that all of those minerals are located right in this nodule. So you basically have these, they're like little bonbons, bonbons of metal that are just sitting on. And so from a very ignorant standpoint, we can think as humans, well, we'll just take one of those, no big deal. We'll just take another one. But if you look really closely at these manganese nodules, they have little kind of tiny little kind of coral reef systems where little microorganisms kind of live. And other little animals come and, feed off of those guys and so on and so forth. And there's this whole chain, just like there is everywhere on this planet. Yeah. And, it's because these systems have existed for, millions of years, that's the least likely to change to any kind of, it's least likely to adapt to change when we go in there. And we just don't know what we don't know. I mean, take, for instance, you mentioned Fabien Cousteau. He's got his Project Proteus, which is an underwater, sea lab, which is so cool. I hope I get to go one day. But he was telling me that one of the things that we've learned is the venom from a cone snail. The venom of a cone snail is 1,000 times more powerful than morphine. It doesn't have any side effects, and it's like, well, that's cool. Yeah. And so pharmaceutical companies are looking at how do we replicate what's happening inside that venom of a cone snail. Right. Well, what if we find the cure to cancer or the cure to COVID-19 at the seafloor? But if we mine it, we will destroy something before we've even discovered it. So herein lies the issue. I actually challenged and with all due respect, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go out after this guy. I just had an honest to goodness question. I was at COP25 in Madrid, which is the Conference of Parties. It's the climate change conference that happens every year through the United Nations. And Prime Minister Henry Puna from the Cook Islands was talking about all the different programs that they're working on, but he started to mention what he called his riches inside his economic exclusion zone of manganese nodules. And he talked about how we could use this to start a revolution, and it would be good for the country, and it would. It would really help them with their exports. It'll help them with their GDP. But the question is that the best thing that should be done? Right. And so I had asked him, I said, I'm from Texas. And in a little place called, in 1901, called Spindletop, we found this black stuff. And we thought, well, gosh, we could use this to fuel our cars. We didn't even have cars, our homes, then ultimately our cars. And now we made this thing called plastic. There's all kinds of things that came out of, if you think about Spindletop and really what we discovered down there in Beaumont, pretty amazing stuff, right? Amazing. Yeah. And, so when you look at it from a 1901 perspective, it's revolutionary. It's amazing. No one in 1901 thought, oh, you know what? This is going to cause climate change. This is going to change the weather patterns. This is going to do... No one ever thought about that stuff. Right. Well, we now know because we're wiser, we're older. It's kind of what I was saying about the whole concept with social media and being an adolescent and being an adult. Well, when it comes to oil and gas, well, we're adults. We know how this stuff works, and we know what's happening. Some of us choose not to look at the obvious, but that's a whole nother conversation and a whole nother podcast. My question to Prime Minister Puna was, here we are at a conference about what do we do about climate change. And here you are talking about removing something possibly very crucial to the ocean environment. Will my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren go to a climate conference, because that was something that they're still trying to fix, and then also an ocean conference because leaders like you pulled out what you call your natural riches out of the oceans? What are the unintended consequences of your actions? And he was like, we don't know what we don't know. We're going to just take a little bit. But, it's kind of like, all right, Pete, man, you look like a big strapping guy. I'm just going to take both your kidneys.
Ooh, I need those.
I'm not going to take all of them. I'm not going to take all your organs. I'm just going to take your kidneys, Yeah. I don't think you're going to appreciate that too much, and that's kind of how I feel about deep sea mining and manganese nodules. I feel like, the best course of action for us right now is to say, hey, you know what? Why don't we have some exploratory missions? Let's go really understand the deep sea, understand the effects coming up to, where we are, and then decide, let's just take a 10-year moratorium and figure out all of this stuff, and then really come back with hard science and say, here are the pros, here are the cons. And I think that's the kind of action that we should take with that stuff.
Yeah, and what if we found a different... Okay, so those things are valuable. We'd like to have them be there. Why not set up some kind of a system where we exchange value for them staying where they are? Like, let's buy the licensing rights for 100 years to that stuff, and the world will break off a check of however much, $10 million a year to keep those things in a sanctuary. So that, because you're right, like, we get to pull oil out of the ground, we get to jam air and water into our ground to get more oil out of the ground. We go explore places because petrochemicals are wonderfully powerful. They're medicine, they're fertilizer, there's the roads we drive on, like all of these things, it's all around us. And so it's impossible to say, hey, Jeremy, you can't have any access to that anymore because it's going to hurt the environment. Like, it's out. It's there. I need electricity. I need to drive my car. I need tires, all these things. And so I get it. Like, how do we compensate them for what is their natural resource, or like we had Dr. Stephen Running on the show. He's a climatologist out of University of Montana. He won the Nobel Peace Prize the year that Al Gore and all those, he's one of the other guys. And he was saying, we have so many resources that we don't, when the petrochem, and I'm, look, there's an oil refinery in my hometown. I'm all about it. I think they're great partners for the community, but when you go to do exploratory drilling and you start pulling oil out and you let natural gas just blow right by you. Steve would say, that's not your right to do that. That's our resource. Fine, drill, go make a lot of money there, but you better capture that resource because, one, we don't want that just vented out into the atmosphere, but two, it's valuable and it belongs to us as a nation or whatever nation it is. And that would make it harder for the petrochemical company to make money because, as you probably know, it's hard to capture natural gas. But that's what's required to get the rights to drill in this place.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I don't think that saying, okay, we're going to just not use, petrochemicals right now. That's not a solution. I mean, it's like all of us are on antidepressants. You rip somebody off antidepressants, all of a sudden you're going to have a bunch of crazy people. If we rip out, say, hey, we're not going to use petrol cars anymore. Everyone's going to go nuts. You need a bridge technology, and we were talking about manganese nodules and rare earth minerals. Well, and guess what? Where do your solar panels and batteries and Teslas come from? Yeah. It comes from the deep sea. Someone gave me a little bit of a hard time on Facebook, I don't know, a while back, and said, I don't understand. A guy like you drives a SUV, a Range Rover, and what you should be driving a Tesla like everybody else. Like, what's the deal? I love Teslas. I would actually love to have a Tesla. But I think there's really no clear answer. It's like I'm not going to solve the problem, is my point, by buying a Tesla. I think there was some research done, which I think this is quite interesting, that the most eco-friendly car you could buy is a Jeep Wrangler. And the reason for it is because they've basically kept the same production line for freaking ever. Yeah. And it's the lowest. To create a Wrangler is like one of the least carbon cars that you can possibly get. Right. Whereas, like, say, a Prius and a Tesla, there's a bunch of stuff there. I'm not knocking on Tesla, and and I definitely don't say, and I will tell you, I don't think the Range Rover is the best thing for the environment either. I will say, though, I just drove down here to my mom and dad's, and I was very proud of myself that I had 20 miles per gallon, because there have been times where I've had 13. I thought, oh my God, this is horrible. But as long as you're just not hot dogging it, it's quite nice. But I do think that we need to figure out, okay, well, what would be that bridge technology? And I think, looking at our lithium polymer batteries or lithium-ion batteries, it's a really old technology. It's a horrible technology. And for those of you who don't know, you've got in a battery, you've got an anode and you got a cathode, and then you've got an electrolyte in the middle, right? And that electrolyte is typically like some kind of fluid. Like you got battery acid, you got acid batteries that's got basically the liquid, and then you've got polymer batteries that are lithium polymer. They've got basically it's like a plasma kind of material. Some of these things are highly volatile, can start fires, all these kinds of things. And there's a guy who invented a lithium-ion batteries. His name's John B. Goodenough. And it's a crazy name because it's like, he's really old now, but he's been working on what's called a solid-state battery. Yeah. And a solid-state battery is basically where you have something like a conductive porcelain that takes the place of that liquid electrolyte. Yeah. And it doesn't blow up, it doesn't cause a fire. It charges much faster. You don't get that memory bubble scenario where you have to no longer can use these things, so you just dispose of them. Right. I think when we look at those kinds of solid state future technologies, and we're using materials that don't require precious metals, now we're talking about a way forward to be able to do something. But then again, you still have to create the market demand to get electric cars to begin with. Yeah. So it's a vicious cycle, there's no silver bullet. And as humans, we always want that silver bullet. We want someone else to take care of it for it. But that's just not how it works. But there's some really interesting technologies on the horizon when it comes to green energy that I think that are truly green, and it's not just greenwashed.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, and I love Teslas. I think they're great.
Oh man, no, I love them.
But the reality is there's an entire infrastructure that has to be laid in, and to lay that in, guess what? It takes petrochemicals and everything else to get all of these, loading stations, and just.
But it is the future. I'll put that out there. It is the future.
It's the future for sure. It's just you can't reliably say it's better for the environment, and even more so, Bjorn would say, why don't you spend your money on fixing poverty? or whatever, one of these other things, because you'll get more bang for your buck than having an electric car that can go from San Francisco to LA without having to fill up,
Yeah.
So you're right. These incremental changes. The other problem, I think we discussed this when I was on the road. The other problem is we have laws of thermodynamics. There's 4 of them. And, petrochemicals are a wonderful, wonderful thing. It's just how do we continue to get more efficiency out of them? Which you look at the modern combustion engine, it's incredible how long it lasts, how efficient it is. It is incredible. And one day we'll get there with electric motors and everything else.
Or fuel cells. I mean, the Department of Transportation now is looking at using non-combustible fuel cells using methane, which is interesting. And then, obviously hydrogen's been around for a while. There's a technology that could be perfected there. I mean, we have options. It's not like that we're hopeless. It's just that, using oil and gas that's the lowest common denominator. It's what we all know. There's already a protocol in place. And it's like, you're asking me to do some hard work. I don't want to do hard work. I just want to I just want to show up and I want to get a check. That's the mindset, and it's like, if you look at it now, it's like, well, we're going to have to put forward all this hard work and infrastructure to make what we're making now.
Yeah.
So when you look at it from a business standpoint, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you can do the right thing and still make a profit, then I think that we're in a good spot. But, it's just going to have a few crazy people to make a big enough impact for the rest of the pack to follow.
We also have these cyclical learning problems. Like I know you recall in the, let's call it the mid 90s, where we're like, what? And late 90s, what the hell are we doing with all these stupid SUVs, Hummers and Hummer 3s? And right now we're back in the same spot where trucks are the leading sales thing. And, crossovers are really just big, huge cars. But, so we're inevitably going to say, hey, this is too much. And then we'll try to get onto some new CAFE standard and everything else. Meanwhile, we just have this psychosis where it's like, or bipolar attitude about energy, we got plenty, we don't have enough, just back and forth. But I think partly, at least in the U.S., it's due to our very schizophrenic way of doing government, where we careen from party to party and struggle to get some of these big things done, which is in part, and this is Pete on a soapbox, it's in part due to our wonderful diversity, but our diversity also, diversity and unity, they're opposites,
Yeah.
So I just did the Gary whack off for Weird Science. I never checked off. Anyhow.
Right. I thought it was was it the Ross on Friends? That's how remember how he flipped off his parents? Yeah.
I never watched that show really.
Yeah.
But the ocean is an area where I think we can get a lot of agreement. But how hard is it to get China, the U.S., Russia to all agree and go in a direction? And then what if we have to alter that direction 10 degrees because it turns out we now know more and we need a little bit more and we got to clean our room some more?
Yeah, I mean, this is an age-old problem, right? I mean, it's like, I don't think that anyone really knows the answer to that question. And I think I think it really comes back down to, stop swimming upstream sometimes and just lead, show people the way to do things. And that's kind of one of the things I really wanted to come out of Ultramarine. Susie and I were like, we can go around bashing people and say, oh, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. And we're like, well, what if we did something and we did, we showed by example how things could be done. And I think that's a much better way to do it because, at the end of the day, like, nobody wants an individual that's going to sit there and complain all day and not provide any possible solutions. I've always been of the mindset it's like, let's just try something. I'm probably going to fail and it's going to be miserable. But in the end, I'll still have done more than the average guy that's sitting there just running his mouth being armchair, politician.
Yeah, I'd rather fail doing and make some mistakes so I can get rid of those mistakes, because those are mistakes that are on the trail. You have to, whoever is out front is going to have to make those mistakes. And then we have to believe that person when they point the mistakes out, and we never do. So the next person in line is going to make the same mistakes, but we have to make them to get where we can get more elegant with our solutions. It's like the balance between aerodynamic cars that are hyper efficient and just glide right through the air, and safety and style. and usefulness. Like these things, and you're an artist, you have to blend these things together into something that's actually palatable. You can make the world's ugliest car that's the most efficient. No one's going to buy it,
True.
And it's funny about that because we have the technology to make cars that just really do just lightly breeze through the air. I mean, you think about how square a Jeep is and how they always get terrible mileage,
Yeah.
But we don't like how it looks, and we don't like the safety of something like that. And think about how heavy cars are now compared to what they used to be. Cars used to be made out of all steel, and our cars now weigh comparable, to them because there's so much metal on the inside, like wires and technology and stuff.
Sure.
And airbags are heavy.
Yes. Yeah. No, it is amazing. I think like my car's like 6,000 pounds.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. It's crazy. Right. But it's wonderful. Yeah. It's comfortable.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is someone who's still driving that 75 B210, there's something to be said for not just consuming something and throwing it away. Like every 10 years you swap out the engine or the clutch or whatever it is. And you're not just filling a junkyard full of parts. Now, granted, a lot of automobile things get recycled, but that all takes energy,
Yeah.
So
yeah, no, it does, and I think you just have to be mindful of these things. But again, it's like okay, moving forward, like where do we go, and how do we do things? I mean, I even we're talking about Land Rover. I mean, they're even working on electric only vehicles, and it's like okay, well that's we at least have to have that conversation. We have to figure that moving forward, and it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how all of these kind of come together. I'm really, really looking forward because the battery technology is the thing that's going to change things. Because when you have lighter batteries, the other group that we work with is a standard graphene, and graphene is an amazing technology. You could make these batteries that are crazy light. They can produce an enormous amount of wattage, and with that invention alone, we'll very quickly see electric flight, and that I think changes everything.
Well, listen,
way more reliable too.
Yeah,
I'd rather fly a Cessna with an electric engine than a combustible engine.
Yeah,
because if you hear one little sound in the air, that's a real good way to get all the cold sweats.
Yeah. I know you've got a heart out, and so I want to make sure we respect that. And I also want to say at some point shipping with tribrid motors, where you break the load free with electric is the way to do it. So let me get you out of there. Let's for sure get that bomb guy on the show, and then just thank you so much for coming on.
No, it's always a pleasure to be here. I really love the conversation. I love listening to your podcast and the guests that you have on. So anything that I can ever do to help, I'm all in.